Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Packard Network Live. Today, I'm really pleased. The cameras are in Austin, Texas, in the U.S. and North America, and I have a very special guest here that I'll do an introduction. It's going to take me a little while to get through this because of all of his qualifications, but it's great. His name is Herb Dyer, and Herb is currently the managing partner at PatternShifts LLC, as I mentioned, in Austin, Texas, but he's also quite active virtually. So I see him engaged every day with people all over the world and that type of thing. And I think as you hear our conversation and hear from me right now about what he's done, you'll agree with me. But basically, Herb will talk a bit about more specifically about what he does, but he helps organizations deal with change. He understands change. I think that everybody in this pandemic era economy has experienced a significant change the past few years. And I know that if I look back at my career, which is roughly 30 years, I had to deal with three major crises: the Asian financial crisis, the 9/11. I was a global banker, and people's money was impacted by that. So that was quite a serious crisis. And then the global financial crisis. Herb has extensive experience through his own lens that we'll talk about as well. But he understands change very well, and so that was one of the things that attracted me. And I asked him to come on this program as well because he's got a very strong spine when it comes to change. So he's your guy for change. All you should know that. And he uses science to teach people to behave differently. So this is not a back of the envelope type of approach that Herb uses. It's proven techniques, and he really gets the claws into the ground and helps people get traction when it comes to change for betterment of themselves, their firms, and other stakeholders as well. So he's also serves as a Vistage chair, where he facilitates an very exclusive peer advisory group of high-performing executives. So he understands the C-suite very well, tightly engaged with them, and he also provides individual coaching to the group members. So it's an extensive array of expertise that Herb basically helps people grow and to potential in whatever they're doing as well. And there's just a couple more things, and I'll take a sip of water and you can hear from Herb, and then we'll get going here. But he was a chief operating officer in the past, and he was accountable for the daily operations of a hospital with a $400 million budget. So we're not talking small sense here. He understands scale. He understands the significance of a pandemic on a big economy. He understands a big firm and what change can do to a big firm, and also to be fiscally responsible and accountable as well. And he also was vice president of the largest nonprofit health system in the United States, overseeing 2,000 people in Central Texas. Okay, so that just gives you a taste. And I happen to know also from my previous discussions with Herb that he has extensive experience with unions, I believe, in New York. Is that right, Herb?
That's correct.
So we could talk,
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. That's fascinating. But lastly, Herb is certified by the NeuroLeadership Institute, which basically backs up the scientific approach that I'm talking about as well.
Correct.
So he's got the qualifications, he's got the credentials to do these things. So Herb, it's time. I deserve a sip of water after that. And welcome to the Packard Network Live. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Brett. I appreciate this, and thanks for the invitation. I think we're going to have a great time today.
Yeah, I agree with that. So anyway, what we're going to do is just for those of you, let's see, we've got, I'm going to start kind of with LinkedIn. Most of our network is going to be on LinkedIn, but we're also going live into Facebook and Twitter. So anybody on any of those channels, please let us know where you're from. And if you're watching live, just indicate live, because Herb and I will also be active after this for those of you that will see the replay. I know that a big part of my network, they're sleeping right now in Asia. So please do engage with us, even though you won't have us live as you're watching this over the weekend in Asia. And I know that we have some people in Europe and Africa. One of my favorite places is in Southern Africa, where I spent time with great people. So thank you to my friends down in Zambia, Botswana, South Africa. So I appreciate that as well. But without further ado, Herb, it's great to have you here. Why don't we just start by maybe you kind of walking us through anything that I missed, but how did you wind up? Let's say you're in university or high school. Did you ever imagine that you'd be doing what you're doing right now?
Not specifically. I would say to you that I knew from early on that I was going to do business. What specific business wasn't clear to me. And if you don't mind, let me give you a little bit of a background. I was born in Jamaica. And as a youngster there, my dad had a farm. And one of the first lessons that still rings true in my mind today is my dad had several workers on the farm. And I remember approaching an adult and saying to him, you need to get to work right away. You need to get to doing my father's work right away. And I remember this gentleman, he could be my father. And he came to me and he goes, you know what? You're the boss's son, but one of the things you need to learn is respect first. Right? So I started learning that lesson from early on, that you need to, in order to be successful, you need to understand how to speak to people respectfully. So fast forward into high school. At the end of high school, I started working in a hospital. And at that point, I got exposed to different departments and different leaders. They recognized that I had talent, for lack of a better word, that I could do things in the future that may end up allowing me to get into the executive rank. I don't know if anyone thought of it that clearly. But while I was in a hospital, that was the defining moment in terms of what I was going to do in terms of business. I realized that I was going to stick with the healthcare arena, not as a clinician, but as a business person. So ultimately, I went to college, got a sociology degree and an economics degree combined. So from there, I went through the ranks as a frontline worker all the way to the executive ranks throughout my career up until 2017 when I decided to do PatternShifts.
Wow, that's what a fantastic journey. And talk to us about, so you wound up in New York, right?
Correct. So
talk to us about that aspect. Yeah.
Yes, I emigrated to New York City, Brooklyn, lived with my dad for the first 11 years of my life, and then started living with my mom at 11. Went to middle school in Brooklyn, and then we moved to Queens, where I went to Springfield High. In Springfield High, I was a track and field runner. I did fairly well in school. You know, I didn't follow the SP program, the advanced program, but I did some classes there. So after graduating from high school, I went to a local CUNY, City University of New York, and got my undergraduate degree there. And several years later, I went to Baruch College for my master's and MPA.
Okay, good. And let's just jump forward a bit to tell us a story or something that we probably wouldn't know about working for a union in New York City.
It's interesting because New York City is a union state, right? And the main union that I interacted with, had negotiations with, and day-to-day operations initially is known as 1199. And 1199 supports different workers in the hospitals. So it ranged from nurses to techs to support services and ancillary service areas. For roughly about 5 years, I transitioned from working in the private or voluntary system into Health and Hospital Corporation, which represents 14 combined acute care hospitals and 4 long-term, which approximately 60,000 employees. So you have in that area, you have multiple unions. So you need to understand the principles of what those contracts are all about as you relate and communicate to the staff.
So did you feel like a lawyer by the time you got done with that?
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting because, you have some employees when you'd have a conflict or a union issue where you'd have what they refer to as a delegate that comes into your office, and they start quoting, paragraphs from the contract. It was an interesting thing because everyone got involved with understanding, whatever the rule or regulation was around that particular direction that maybe a supervisor or manager may have told an employee, given an employee directions on. So it was just interesting. Yeah, by the time I left the organization, I definitely felt like according to my Jamaican uncle, I felt like a bush lawyer.
I love that. It's really funny. I was in Japan for 6 years, and one of the things that I had I'm not going to say a pleasure of doing, it was quite unpleasant actually, was during my final year there, the regulator had kicked out and stripped the banking license from the private bank, I was in the consumer bank, so it was a different part of the bank, and New York City basically came in and fired nearly everybody. So then they handed that bank to, actually, I had to take it and close it. Had a year. My team and I had to close that thing, and I felt like a lawyer. The same exact. So I know exactly what you're talking about. After meetings all day long with lawyers, you feel like you've earned a law degree. It's really baptism by fire, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you have to pick up those contracts and do some referrals. Obviously, you're not going to be studying it verbatim, right? But you have to understand the principles of what you're dealing with in terms of, as it relates to compensation, how you make your assignments, what you're allowed to do in terms of saying yes or no to an employee. You have to understand those contracts. Absolutely.
Yeah. How did you wind up? So you went from New York to, is it Texas directly?
Yes, Austin, Texas.
So how in the world did that happen?
That was a major transition. It was interesting. My colleagues and friends in New York were like, "You're moving to Texas? Are you kidding me?" And I said, to be honest, and thinking about the New York environment, what would be probably closely aligned would be Austin. And I said, actually, I'm moving to Texas, but it's Austin. So, it won't be a significant
soft landing. It's a soft landing, right?
It's a soft landing, yes. But, the primary reason for moving to Texas is because I had 2 young kids. My son was about 7 years old and my daughter about 12 months old. And my wife and I had made a decision that we needed to raise them in a less complicated environment. And it just so happens my wife is a Texan. She was born in grew up in Port Lavaca, and attended Texas State in Austin. So the decision to move to Austin was fairly easy. So after interviewing and negotiating for probably about a year or so, I was able to land an executive position with Seton, which is part of the Ascension system that you introduced at the top of the hour.
Okay. Oh, terrific. That's fantastic. Let me pause this for just a second, Herb. We have Let me see. We have our friend Joe Gonzalez from Miami, Florida here. Joe, thank you. You always appreciate you being here, and especially because you've been up since either 2 or 3 a.m. at the gym working out.
Yes.
So probably time for Joe to go to bed, right, Herb?
Yeah, Joe is packed full of energy. Absolutely. Thanks for being here, Joe.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
We have Ken Packer from Silicon Valley, California.
Okay.
Ken, thanks for tuning in. We have Matt Warbies from Matt. I think you're from York over in across the pond in England. So Matt, thanks for all your support as always as well. And that's just to name a few here. And I think we've got let's see. I think that's it for right now. So, but it looks like more are popping in. Please let us know. I know that just on LinkedIn, there's currently 10 people. So let us know where you're from, and be thinking of your questions. Herb and I would love to field any questions. It could be directed at either one of us, and just let us know what you want to do. But we're going to keep talking, and we'll let the audience and participants, we'd love for you to participate in the conversation. So please feel free to do so. Anyway, Herb, back to us. So Herb, tell me, maybe we could talk just a little bit about how you, over the course of your impressive career, doing many different things, how you've, we all have high points and low points, ups and downs. And how have you been able to get when you're down? How have you been able to kind of keep going? Because a lot of people, they fall down and there's kind of a dramatic change that happens, and they get off track and that type of thing. And my listeners always like to hear, because everybody's getting knocked down. So what do you do when you're knocked down? How do you kind of get back up and stay on track?
Well, I try to be as disciplined about what I do in life, but I also have the level of flexibility to change. And I think you introduced that early on about being a change agent. When I left Seton, for example, I decided, back it up a little bit. I remember taking the first 2 weeks and doing some traveling with the family. And if anyone had said to me, Herb, were you stressed out? Do you need a break? I would have said, no, this is Herb Dyer. I'm fine. I exercise, I eat properly, so I'm good to go. But within the first 2 weeks, I recognized I truly needed a decompression to kind of just embrace the work-life balance, spend some time with my family, and understand what the being true to oneself was all about. Because I wasn't doing that. I was on that treadmill for a constant 24/7 for a couple of decades, right? Never took really the time to go on a vacation. And when I went on vacation, I was always on the computer or the phone or whatever the case may be. So I would say to you, getting knocked down, I need to step back and evaluate what is going on, what is missing, and also while I'm at it, being grateful, even though I may not necessarily be at the highest point, being grateful for what I have, my health, my family, the fact that I'm okay financially. All of those things I take into reality check and saying, okay, you know what? You need to do certain things now to regain your step or lift yourself back up. So I put principles in place where I do thinking time. I do my research. I speak to folks who I respect, what I would consider trusted advisors. And I have those conversations with people that I feel really comfortable with and saying, here's where I am, here's where I'm struggling. What are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely fantastic. There's a lot in there as well. And Joe is commenting, saying discipline is key. I think I heard a lot of discipline in what you just talked about, Herb, and consistency plays a huge role. Step back, gather one's thoughts. I think that's great as well. It took me many years and my wife to actually get me to start doing that as well. So I can completely relate to what you're talking about there about going just nonstop, and you're really into it because you're committed, right? deeply committed, but there's also a way to commit like you're doing today to your clients. You're just as committed now as you were back when you were working for the union. And but how you learn to do these things that you talked about, and actually you bring a little bit more balance and harmony into your life by doing that. So I think that's great. Do you encourage your clients today, in what you do today, to do what you just spoke about? Do you also cover that?
Oh, absolutely. Yesterday I was coaching, at an executive coaching session. And I remember talking through that coaching session about, are you taking me time? Are you being active, going for a walk? Are you watching your nutrition? Are you watching your rest time or your sleeping time? So I think all of those things are most important from a health perspective. If you're healthy and you understand the principles of what you need to do to be most productive, you put those things in place and you're going to make your life, the quality of your life, a lot better. But you have to create good habits, period. And what I coach on and what I recommend on, I also walk the walk and talk the talk. So I cycle, I get into the gym and do some weights. I watch what I eat. I love a glass of Glenlivet, but I also manage that, right? So if I have a drink today, I don't necessarily drink the next day, or I max out maybe 3 days out of the week and I spread it out and I make sure I hydrate. So all of those things I think are important to how you manage yourself and being empathetic towards yourself as well. I think it's really important that you don't beat up on yourself about mistakes and issues, because when you do that, all you're going to do is tense out.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. We have Rollis here from. He said, "Say hello to Herb for me." This is Rollis from Houston. So,
yes.
Rollis, thank you. And Rollis, if you have any questions for either of us, feel free to tee it up in there as well. And let's see, we have Joe is saying the mental approach to life has many facets. Take that step back, stay healthy. That's the only way to sustainability. And I think that's really what Herb's saying, and Joe, what you're saying as well. And I happen to know that both of you practice what you preach on that point as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that's
Absolutely.
So important, right?
Yes.
So many people nowadays are struggling with mental health, and we're probably not going to talk a lot about mental health in this discussion, but it's out there today, and it's a big issue. And you just talked about the physical part as well. And in your opinion, Herb, how are the two related? Are they related, or are they independent? What's your view on? Can we talk about that for a minute or two? Yeah.
Sure. Mental health, I think, ties back to your physical health. If you're active, it helps you to create, first of all, being physically healthy. You're going to be doing some things to help manage your ups and downs as it relates to your mental status. So I think, again, the things we talked about, eating properly, if you're diagnosed with a mental issue or a mental challenge, then obviously you need to see a clinician, and you need to make sure that you're following whatever directions and routine that they're providing you. So if you need meds, or if you need to get in some kind of a counseling process, you make sure you follow those things. But I do think the mental and physical, they're complementary. They're not separated. So if you're healthy, and, like individuals who experience dementia, if they are not physically active, their mental capacity decrease accordingly. Again, I'm not a clinician about this, but I know they're interactive in order to be your healthiest.
Yeah, I appreciate your views on that, and you're spot on as far as I'm concerned as well on all fronts, especially the part about seeing a professional qualified expert if you do have a condition. You heard Herb say it, you're hearing me say it. Don't attempt to diagnose it yourself. Don't say, I've got this under control. Don't say what Herb's doing or what Brett's doing. Seek a qualified professional. But
Correct.
the point that we're really making on this right here is that if you take care of your body, which a person I admire, Jim Rohn, who's Tony Robbins' mentor, right?
Yes.
I had the opportunity to see this guy back in 1988 do a seminar. He had a quote, Herb, and it said, "Take care of your body because it's the only one you got."
Yes. Yes.
you can't trade it. You can't trade it in, right? And
okay.
you don't need to. We don't need to be a qualified medical expert to let people know that. Okay, so maintain that body, take care of that body, but in order to maintain it, see your doctor. Okay, see a professional qualified expert. There's a lot of people in Africa seeing this, and other countries under development. And I spoke to my guest last week about that as well. Reach out, make sure you're seeking, do your research if you're located in a country that might not have the same mental health resources that the U.S. or Canada does, for example, or the UK.
Sure.
But do that as well, and find that expertise, because that's so important as well. But
I will say this,
Sure.
and I don't want to get on the political platform about this, but I would say as a country, we need to do a better job of managing mental challenges, because roughly 20% of the population, I can say, in terms of some research I've read in the past, are affected with mental challenges. And we don't do a very good job of managing that like we do on the physical side in terms of acute care hospitals. And I will say this, when I was involved with day-to-day operations, you would see quite a few individuals who would be coming through the emergency department for physical care, but they also were mentally challenged, and to the point where some of them may have even been dangerous, right? So I think we need to do a better job of managing that from a clinical perspective, and not utilize our jail system, our penitentiaries, to be that managing tool. I think in some areas we're seeing some improvement with some insurance companies are recognizing that if they get in front and be proactive with it, it also would cost ultimately less to the insurance company and to the system as a whole.
That's a wonderful point. Yeah, wonderful point. There's a lot that can be learned by, having worked in different countries, a lot that can be learned by countries that are doing a great job. How do you define a great job? Well, that's a bit subjective, sure. But I think understanding what kind of resources do you need to deck again, and programs against physical condition. And I think in the United States, I agree with you. There's been a lot of effort for many years to direct people the right way on that as well. Singapore, there'll be a lot of Singaporeans that see this over the weekend. In Singapore, the government there has, past 5 years or so, has done a huge education push on preventing diabetes. Okay. Right. And you're talking about a part of the world where rice is a staple food, right?
Yes.
And we all know what Herb and I know what happens when rice hits your stomach. It's pure sugar.
Yeah.
So the government has started to educate people on how to eat healthier to prevent that. I think what Herb's saying here is that also from a mental perspective, if those same types of programs could be put at the forefront in countries, that would be of enormous help. And I guess that, we'll be in the fate of our politicians and the private sector. Yes. I'm sure there are elements of the private sector that can, also do a good job at this. But sure. I'm in complete agreement with you on that as well.
There is, unfortunately, when you are identified with a mental challenge, there's a schism there. There is, oh my God, and I think it's one of the things where we need to be, as a society, be more embracing of that as a natural illness. And because it's a natural illness, we need to do things in our habits, in how we seek help, seek advice. All of those things are important, that we manage those things out and not ignore it because we think that we are looked at in a negative way. And I think it needs to happen on both sides, the individuals whom are impacted with this, as well as individuals that may be observing. I want to share something real quickly with you. You mentioned you went on to talk about rice and how it becomes sugar in your stomach, right? 9 months ago, and I think you saw my posts on my Achilles injury. And I'm very active. I cycle about 6,000 miles a year. I go into the gym for a couple of days, 2 days out of the week. And of course, I manage my intake. Now, after my injury, 1 month after the injury, I gained 6 pounds. Now, keep in mind, Brett, I had reduced my intake, but I didn't change up my diet significantly. In other words, I was still apportioning the carbs, the vegetables, the protein as it was when I was very active. I just cut down the portions. However, gaining weight was a problem in the immediate upfront experience. And I spoke to a nutritionist, and we agreed that I should basically reduce my carbs down significantly. So frankly, I've kept it as a norm now where I am on more of a protein diet. So I was able to lose that 6 pounds, maintain my weight during that time, that 7-month recovery period, and able to see a difference in my performance as well.
Wow. So how about that?
Yeah, I think it's important to always be open to that advice and be open to change. Because, we have a tendency as human beings, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
And that's not the way. You should always be open to learning and changing and adjusting. Be innovative, be creative.
Great advice. And also when you're feeling good, I'll just bolt onto that. When you're feeling good, that's when it's important to work harder on yourself because something will happen and you will have a health issue, and it could be physical or mental. So keep that, work on your brain. It's a muscle, right? Our friend Joe talks about this all the time, right? Work on your body, right? And the physical part of that as well, because when something does happen to you, if you're in better condition, you'll be able to better absorb and recover from whatever impairment hits you, right?
And to tap into my friend Joe's comment about the brain as a muscle, we tend to, as a society, believe that as we get older, the gray matter shrinks. Yeah, to some extent it does. But the point is, if you keep it active, if you learn something new every day, if you take on something that you're fearful about learning, it allows for the gray matter to continue expanding. And neuroscience has proven that. They have used magnetic resonant imaging units to show how the brain actually grow or develop or react to these learnings. So I think it's important to understand that because you're aging doesn't mean that you use as a default not to do certain things.
Wow, that is amazing. Hey, Herb, could you tell the viewers, just give us as concise as possible, just a description on neuroscience and what it is and that type of thing. Just if you could just break it down into the simplest of terms so we can understand that. I have somebody in my network named Lisa Goldenthal, who is in Santa Monica, California. And I know if she's not, I don't think she's on here live, but she'll be watching this. And she was highly interested in having somebody talk about this.
Yes. I would say to you that our brain, which is 3.5 pounds of our entire body, is obviously the king and queen of our body, so to speak. And the important thing here is that you need to be open to learning new things. You need to investigate new things. When you investigate new things and you do it in terms of repetition, it becomes a norm. It becomes a good habit. And I think when you think about what we were talking about early on about business and how we interact with our staff, if you empower your staff to have a voice at the table, if you give them a safe working environment, their participation level increases. If you want to truly develop a culture within your organization that is positive, you make those employees safe. The brain is all around the fight or flight methodology, if you want to use that as a comparison, so to speak, in terms of how we behave emotionally. So emotion is a high portion of how we operate as human beings. And if we can manage those emotional experiences in a more positive way, that's how we accomplish better and greater things. That's how we become more creative and innovative. So that's as simple as I think I can break it down in terms of what neuroscience is, in terms of communication and building one's mindset. All right, you want to develop not a mindset where you're going to be stuck. You want to develop a growth mindset. And if you allow for yourself to be open to differences, allow yourself to experience different people, different culture, different foods, whatever the case may be, that is how your neuroplasticity goes to work and expand your brain capacity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And please, for those of you watching, if you have any questions about this, please tee them up. But it does make sense, Herb. But I'm not so sure that a large proportion of the population understands this, or am I missing something?
Well, I think, it's interesting. Yesterday, I had a session with some entrepreneurs, and it was around resilience. How do you bring resiliency into your leadership?
Yep.
And we were talking about one of the participants. He owns a company about 40 million revenue a year. He said, Herb, these are some simple things that you have shared with us, but certain leaders refuse to accept that, or they refuse to change. And yes, I think the overall population understands that they need to learn, but there is not a motivation, so to speak, to learn something new every day. And you can coach it, but if you don't get that person actively doing things, they may know about it theoretically, but if they're not putting it into practice, then they won't get success or gain success. You have to be actively involved in doing whatever. It's kind of like the individual who said, you know what, my New Year's resolution is to lose 40 pounds and be in the gym. And if you look back historically and from research, you see most of those individuals, they start out January 1, and they may last till January 30th or maybe even into March. But then they quit, because what they do is they go back to what they're used to doing. And we, as human beings, don't like change. We want to make sure that we are in a comfort zone where we can manage situations in what we would consider a normal way. So I think the situation here is, how can you get individuals to understand, in order for them to be successful in life, they have to set goals, they have to write them down, and they have to actively do them. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you can't muster that internal discipline, then get yourself someone that you respect, share your goals with them, and ask them to help prod you through or encourage you or motivate you to do it. And I think there's always a way to gain success, right? If I remember looking back at my corporate executive role. When I was a younger manager, for example, paying attention to the detail was not my first inclination. So I had to learn how to do that. And I had to make the adjustment in order to do that, to be successful. If I didn't make that adjustment, then I would not have been able to climb the ladder to an executive level simply because I didn't do the work. So it's important to recognize where your opportunities and weaknesses are and go after it to make the adjustment and learn accordingly.
Right. Yeah. Hey, Herb, I've got a question from my friend jumping over to Facebook for a second here. I don't want to eliminate the other channels here. Seema from Zambia, excuse me. To what extent do you see a risk of a treadmill effect when physical exercises is not accompanied by the right eating and drinking?
Oh yeah, so I'll take a simple analogy. Whenever I go and ride 50 miles with a group of riders, let's say, for example, averaging 18, 19 miles an hour, part of that responsibility is to make sure that you bring small packets of nutrition with you, so that as you're riding, you're taking in calories so that you don't bump, you don't run into a wall. The same thing, when you finish working out at the gym, within 20 minutes to an hour, you need to get some protein in your body so that you're helping to repair that muscle that you have broken down. It is important that all of these things are brought into play. You can't do one with an exception. You have to exercise, eat properly, get your rest, manage your stress. Those are all the components of how you live a healthy life. So if you're going to be on that treadmill, and I would say, when I was a much younger man, I lived on that principle of work hard, play hard. Now, you can do those things, but you also need to understand if you work hard and play hard, you're burning the candle at both ends. You need to make the adjustment in terms of those other things I just described.
Absolutely. That's great. Seema, thank you for that question. And thanks, Herb. That's a wonderful answer as well. And we have Amelia Campos here. And Amelia, thank you for joining, first of all, and saying the culture of the organization sets the stage for growth from the start. Think about how comfortable we live in groups within our own culture. Mm-hmm. The same is true in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Any comments on that?
Oh, absolutely. When I first became a supervisor, I was leading a department of about 60 people. And as I told you, my formative years were spent in Jamaica. So, not necessarily like Japan where they're chauvinistic, but you do have that, the patriarch, so to speak, is at the top of the family. And women were also treated in somewhat of a second class, if you want to call it, in terms of citizenship, right?
Right.
Additionally, because Jamaica was also very conservative, the church defined a lot of what the culture looked like. So when you talk about someone who was considered gay, they were considered a pariah, so to speak. When I started working in corporate, I had to learn very quickly to take those judgmental biases out of how I dealt with people. So you need to understand, particularly in the New York City area, I learned that very quickly as well, because you have a more diverse group. You have people from Europe, the Caribbean, South America, and you need to understand, in order to run an effective team, you as a leader need to understand their subcultures, if you want to use that term. You need to understand their culture and understand how you create a team effect in the workplace. So you have to preach about being empathetic, being sensitive, have critical listening, do not be judgmental, take out your cognitive biases, ask questions. And you, as a leader, I had to make sure that I do those things so that it was apparent to others that I was forming opinions about people without truly understanding the facts. So yes, in a workplace, when you have different folks in a workplace, you have to understand the differences in behavior, culture, and so forth. And now one final thing about that.
Mm-hmm.
I also noticed that, and research proves it too, Brett, as you know, when you have a diverse workforce that includes, ethnicity, gender, and whatever other forms of differences, when you bring those individuals together and you have good leadership and a good solid team, those teams perform better than a homogeneous group. I mean, that's just,
you bet they do. Yep.
Yeah. No one is making that up. That research has shown that through, Harvard Business Review, Gallup, McKinsey, all other types of those firms who have created these surveys. You will see that positive outcome is not only for the people and how they feel about each other, but financially, the bottom line, all of those things come back in terms of positive return on that investment.
Absolutely. And, the profit, just the bottom line is, if you want to increase your profits sustainably, focus on inclusive diversity, period, end of story.
Yeah, end of story. Yeah.
You and I are completely aligned on that. Again, having had the opportunity to work in other countries, other cultures that were different than the culture that I grew up in, I don't know another way to operate her, because most of my career was in other countries and putting together diverse teams, and I don't really know another way. So when I hear a lot of the let's say ideas that don't work around this as well, like let's set a target to interview 3 women for every open position, that stuff isn't going to work. What's going to work is having a woman's point of view around the table of the board, and also having an African American point of view, an Asian American point of view, a European point of view. This is what real diversity is. And then once you have that team together, making sure that they feel that their voice will be heard and acted upon, that's inclusive diversity, and that's what drives your profits.
Absolutely. And again, the research shows it. I think McKinsey had done several research where they identified where they had gender balance in the senior staff as well as boards. You found out they were seeing a 32 to 36% increase to their bottom line. So, why are we even arguing about this, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Well, I think we got a lot of people out there attempting to monetize, an issue that is an important issue. So it is. And I think you and I were not discounting that, but this has a much simpler solution to it probably than what's out there. But that's just kind of life, and everybody has to deal with that. But I think that one of the reasons I put more women, I don't have a target, but there are just naturally more women on this program than men, is for this very point, is to give women the platform. Because when that happens, my audience in this particular case actually hears a different point of view than they're hearing from me all the time, right? So it's like,
absolutely. I'll share a quick story with you.
Sure, I love it. Yeah.
When I was about 27, 28 years old, I was leading a team. Probably one of the most important project I had at that time. And the first 3 months, the performance, the data, the outcomes, I wasn't meeting those KPIs. And fear took over. I panicked. I'm like, oh my God, I'm 28 years old. I have one of the best projects in my career at this point, and I'm going to blow it because the team is not delivering as the goals were established. So I called the team together and, got on stage, and I explained to them that we need to do some things differently. And while I was up there on the stage talking, you know, I started getting on my bully pulpit, so to speak, talking about it. And I was, in fact, sharing the story with Rollis because we were in Arizona recently. And when I got up there and started toting about all the great things that I've accomplished and all these other projects, and kind of forgot what I was up there all about because my ego got in the way. My one of my colleagues and friend, Susan Bradford, she says to me, you know, really slow. She's from Wyoming, and she's really reserved. And she put her hand up and she goes, "Dyer, you're a legend in your own mind." And one of the things that I learned from Susan, not with just that event, but whenever I got to the point where, you know, I was panicking or got fearful or my ego took over, she was always there to kind of pull me back and give me the understanding, not of what I wanted to hear, but what I needed to hear. And she did that from a woman's perspective, and she wasn't afraid to do that. And I learned from there that as I build teams moving forward, I always found a way to balance it. I didn't necessarily go out and say, okay, 50% and 50%, but I made sure when I asked the recruiters to make sure that I have a balanced, diverse team, because it makes my job, frankly, easier, because we're going to deliver, I think, at a higher level.
And you'll deliver faster.
Yes.
I mean, I can vouch for this, having, you know, it works in Zambia, it works in Tokyo, it works in Singapore, it works in Korea, you know, it works in the UK. It doesn't matter. It work in North America, Canada, sure, right? We're covering a big part of the world here. Work in Latin America. Right. So get that. It's great advice that Herb is giving here, and I think that's great. Herb, I got a question for you. What is in your humble opinion? You're a humble man. In your humble opinion, what's your legacy today, and is that what you want it to be, say, 10 years from now?
Yes. I mean, that's an easy one for me. I throughout my entire career, and not just a career, from I was a kid, if I were in a schoolyard and I noticed that someone was getting bullied, even if I was putting myself at risk, I would step in. So I think throughout my life, I've always felt that I needed to help those that needed to be helped. I've always mentored, whether it was from within the workplace or from the universities or wherever that relationship may come about, because I also sat on numerous nonprofit boards. So my legacy is I want to be known as someone who cared and someone who made a difference in the community across the board, not in any one group or in any one situation, but that I look at a situation, just like I talk about diversity and inclusion and equity in the workplace, I live my life the same way. And it doesn't matter your gender, your race, or wherever you're from. I try to think of how do I relate to this person. And I think about how I relate by how I would relate to me, how I want to be spoken to, how I want to be treated. So I would say, to give you a more succinct response, is on my tombstone, I'd like to see that I made a difference for people.
That's fantastic. What an inspirational legacy. I have no doubt that you're going to, I mean, only time will tell, right? So yes. Brett Packard can't tell, but I have every bit of confidence in you that you'll achieve that. And my impression with you and I've had a lot of just dialogues naturally, organically on particular topics where I've seen on repeated occasions on totally different topics, what you just articulated, that comes through loud and clear, right? And
Thank
there
you.
is something for the viewers that are not familiar with Herb and what you do. There's something that I love called the Dyer Coaching Report. You want to tell
Yes.
us what that is, please? Because I
Yes.
think I'm determined, not just through this program, but anything that I could do to make this report even more impactful than it is. Tell us what the Dyer Coaching Report is.
I totally appreciate that. So yeah, the
Sure.
Dyer Coaching Report came about roughly a year plus ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is it's a daily post, and it
Yep.
may come out of something that I may have learned or interacted with a client or with my family, or frankly, maybe some kind of a situation that created controversy in whatever capacity, and I would give my opinion. I often also, when I put that coaching report out, it's a specific subject matter that I define my point of view, but I also support it based on research. So I don't just put it out there for the social media of just putting something out. I want folks to walk away from there saying, hey, you know what? I didn't think of it that way. So therefore, I will look at it differently the next time around. I support my points of view again with facts. And from there, you can, and Brett, I thank you very much, because you and Joe and others will respond and identify their thoughts. And the coaching report is also not for everyone to agree with me. If there is something that,
Right.
The idea is to create dialogue. And that's the important piece here. Again, for me, it's always growing the community, getting folks to get into dialogue. Most of the times when I do my peer advisory through PatternShifts, I create a dialogue. I create interactive dialogue, because that's the way people learn and learn more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And well, I happen to know that I do know that coaching report is backed by data. You're a big data person, meaning that you're not just it's not cotton candy out there, right? It's really backed, and it's rock solid, hard as steel, and people can rely on the facts that support the report. They can debate it if you don't like, a lot of that's life, right? And that's good. Actually, it's good to have those debates. It's very healthy. You and I were talking recently about that it's good to have that. But that's where growth comes into play for everybody involved, and people, looking to learn on this platform. And tell us, what's the best way to reach you, to learn more about you above and beyond what we're doing here, Herb? Is it LinkedIn or website? What do you tell us how people can best contact you? Yeah.
Right. So LinkedIn is obviously, again, I'm on LinkedIn every day. Just as I know yourself and Joe and Wallace, I know is also on LinkedIn. Some other names I think you mentioned as well. But LinkedIn is one primary form. You can also go to my website, www.PatternShifts.com. And that's a management consultant firm that myself and two other partners lead.
Gotcha. Good. We'll make sure we get that website address for those of you watching this live and on replay in the comment section, so that you can so that people can easily find out more as well. Herb, any parting words on anything that you prior to the program wanted to say that we haven't had a chance to cover in anything before we sign off?
I think you did a great job with your questions, but I would say, I look at where we are in this country, and I see that there is partisanship, and the divide, it keeps getting wider and wider. And I think one of the things I'd love to see is that people do more research, do their specific research about what is going on, and don't spend time listening to the talking heads, the opinionated talking heads. Don't just look at what's on social media. do a deeper dive. If you do your research, you'll find out that you will learn the facts in a more stable manner, and you can form your opinion based on those facts and not be in a position where it's the political or the politician's way. So please, I would say spend more time doing your research, speaking to individuals that you have respect for, that you know may be expert or authorities in those areas. That will make a huge difference in terms of your relationships, period.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to endorse everything you just said, because
I appreciate that.
I have a view. Well, and I just happen to agree with every word you just said, and for the following reasons. One is that there's a lot of social media driven by robots and, these automated things that, Elon Musk is talking about eliminating,
Yes.
which might be good, but it's not just Twitter. But there's a lot of things out there on people sitting on their couch giving an opinion. And then you've got major corporate media reading Twitter and saying, well, Twitter, what's trending on Twitter is they're saying this about Brett and this about Herb, but it has no reflection on what people really think. It's somebody sitting on a couch somewhere, just
Correct.
trying to make their opinion go viral, right? And the corporate media is helping them do that when it has no reflection. So I agree with that. And the second reason I agree with you, Herb, is that I read 5 newspapers every day.
Yes.
Not one. I'm proud to say not one of them is based in the United States. Okay. And I'm very proud of that fact. Okay.
Yes.
But I read these papers and I'm aware that there are affiliates like the Associated Press and different things that feed into some of these news. I'm aware of all of that. But when I read the South China Morning Post, when I read the Sydney Morning Herald, when I read the Nikkei out of Japan, the English version, when I read the Singapore Straits Times, when I read the Telegraph in the UK. Okay. So I'm aware of that. But when I read the article, okay, I say to myself, what did I not read? What did they not report?
Sure.
And then I, what really resonated, what you said with me is we all have a brain. We talked a lot about our brains in this hour session, right? When you read an article in the paper, ask yourself that question, right?
Sure.
And then have this dialogue and go back and replay what Herb just talked about. And I think that you'll find that you might, might start to make decisions about certain issues based more on hard fact, right?
Absolutely.
But you've got to understand that you might not have been presented the complete picture. So
Absolutely.
seek the data, which is really what you're saying, Herb. And
Absolutely.
I think it's great. And I wish we had more time, but we can create more time and maybe have a more detailed dialogue about this in the future.
I'd love to. I surely hope that our content came across in a positive way to your network. I know you have a huge network. Yeah. So, but yeah, thank you for this opportunity, and thanks for your great questions.
You betcha, Herb. Thank you very much. I wish you and everybody, thank you all for tuning in on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Appreciate that. Please do tee up any questions for those of you watching on replay. Let us know. Herb and I love the engagement, the dialogue, and we'll stay active on the weekend and beyond. So with that, I look forward to welcoming everybody back next week. I'll announce my guest early in the week, probably on Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you then. So thanks.